Today we're going to look at how Release Engineer is able to manage your infrastructure layer as well as your application layer. Here we have a Release Engineer open to the Application tab. An application is going to be made up of a set of components, and the components that we're going to add in today are going to be an infrastructure layer of Tomcat. So we'll drag Tomcat out there. And then as far as Tomcat, we're actually going to install our additional WAR file. So the WAR file we're going to bring in place is called Uptime. Now this is going to go to our application server. Part of this application, we also have a database that is needed. And here we're going to pull out the database component. And once the database component is installed, we are actually going to install the changes to the database itself. So we're going to pull out this SQL file. So what we have is we have Ansible performing the Tomcat install and configuring it. Once that's been completed on the server that's slated for the Tomcat instance, we'll deploy the WAR file Uptime over to that Tomcat server. Next, once that's finished, we'll go ahead and install Postgres on our second machine. And once Postgres is installed and configured by Ansible, we'll go ahead and install and configure the database with the new tables and some data. If we go ahead and drive down into these components, we can see that we are able to set some of the default overrides for how the install through Ansible is going to work. We can change the Tomcat port. If we go back and look at the Postgres one, go to that component, you can see that there's a different set of attributes that are associated to the Postgres install. These attributes come from the Galaxy Roles, the default variable values from the Tomcat role. So here we're able to go ahead and override what's happening there as part of the Release Engineer deployment process. Let's go ahead and go back over to our application. Now we've just dragged and dropped our application in place. We're going to go ahead and deploy it. So we'll hit deploy. And when we're going to deploy to an environment. Now the environment that we're working with is made up of two servers. One's the application server for Tomcat, and the second server is the database server for Postgres. Here we can see this is the actual Tomcat server. It's not up and running because we haven't done any installs yet. And if we go over to our My PuTTY window, we'll look at our Postgres install. So here I'm going to search through and see if there's any packages for Postgres installed. So we have no packages for Postgres installed, and the ID that Postgres is going to run under doesn't exist either. So let's go ahead and get our install running here. So you can see that we kicked off our install build deployment 965. We've gone through, we're doing our Tomcat piece here first. While that's running, we're going to go ahead and look at a few other things. So as part of that, like I said, we're deploying to an environment. If we drill down into what the environment is made up of, we have the Postgres server and the Tomcat server. One of the things that makes Release Engineer very flexible is that we can assign a role or a component type to the server. So this server for the Linux, called Linux Postgres, will accept any components that are of the type Postgres DDL and SQL. So this means that all the components that are tagged with that component type will be delivered to that server. So if we look at the Tomcat server accepts a component type called application file. So this is going to be where the Tomcat is installed, as well as the WAR file. So as your environment grows, as you move through the pipeline, in development you may have just Postgres and Tomcat running on the same server. Integration, you may have split it out like I have here. And then when you get up into readiness or production, you're going to have multiple database servers and multiple application servers. Release engineer will go ahead and deploy to multiple the WAR file to each one of those instances for Tomcat, for example. So you can actually also do a rolling deployment that allows you to roll through your application servers, deploy to server 1, and keep the other ones up and going. Once that's completed, then it goes to server 2 and so on. So it gives us a lot of flexibility of how we control the production environment without having to redo or rescript the process. So what you deliver, the process that you use for the dev builds, the continuous delivery pipeline, at development all the way through production is going to be the same and repeatable. So let's go back to our application. Look at our timeline again. You can see that we have the WAR file has been deployed now. And let's look at the log. So you can see we went through, did our install using Ansible, did our configuration, restarted everything. Once that's been completed, we actually go ahead and release engineer delivers the WAR file outside of Ansible. So all we have to do is tell release engineer what we want to deploy, in this case the uptime.war, and it understands how to deliver it to the target machine, the target node, agentlessly, just like Ansible does, and then go ahead and do any pre and post activities around the delivery of that WAR file. So in this case, we have Tomcat set up so it understands a dynamic update. But if we had to do a stop and restart of Tomcat, we can do that as a pre or post step to the at the component level or application level. And you can see we've moved on to the Postgres install. So let's go ahead and look at the other components that are available to use as part of an application. So if we look at our components here, I have an infrastructure layer in my tree here as part of our domains. And then we have all the tags that are available from the Galaxy Roles. So if we want to install, let's say, a cron tab configuration, we can pull that out as one of our additional components that would be put together as part of our application. Now, one of the nice things with using Release Engineer in conjunction with Ansible is that you get the big picture of what an application actually needs. So if an application has already installed Tomcat, when we come back through the next time, we'll recognize that Tomcat is already installed, skip over that, and then go ahead and install the updated WAR file. If there was no updates to the WAR file and we just had database changes, we would be just focusing on the database changes, the alters, adding new columns, adding new data. That would occur through the process. So Release Engineer is smart enough to understand as we move through the process, if something's already been done, it will skip over it. You can also force, if you always wanted to redo something, you can. There's a checkbox that you just go ahead and say force a deployment every single time. Like I said, all the components map over to your Galaxy Roles. So if we wanted to install Drupal, for example, we could do that as part of the application. Also, applications can be grouped together into what we call a release. So we'll look at release here. So in this case, we have 3 different applications that are all grouped together in this one release. So you can pull together different application teams that need to go on the same server and have everything in place there in one high-level view. So let's go back over to our application, look at our timeline again, and you can see that our roll forward has been deployed. Let's go ahead and look at the log file. So we did here's our war file going out. We started our Postgres install and configuration. And then we have, after Postgres has been installed, you can see where we pushed out our SQL statements and we're actually updating and creating our tables. So let's go to our application here. Let me refresh. You can see that our application, our Tomcat version is up and running. Let me go over to our database server. We'll just list the packages installed. We can see that we have Postgres installed now. And we have our ID for Postgres. Let me go ahead and change over to that user ID. And let's go ahead and select some data that we put in there. And you can see that we have our data in our database. So just to recap, with Release Engineer, we've married together the infrastructure layer and the application layer. So you have one big picture of how an application is actually assembled, all the different components that are needed for an application to run, all the infrastructure pieces that are needed at that level, and then on top of that, the changes that the developers are going to be sending down the pipeline. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please let us know.